So this is like Brewster's Millions at this point. They spent $700,000 in the span of less than 7 months. Fucking crazy. That's a lot of money. Maybe not to them, but to me. And as Johnny said, and this is a big part of the TV movie that they did, like the Law and Order one. They did all sorts of different ones. But a huge part of this case was the fact that Eric confessed the murders to the psychologist, Jerome Oziel. And, Lyle got involved in this whole thing. He actually threatened Oziel, and Oziel told his mistress, Judeline Smith, who, by the way, was played by Heather Graham in one of these documentaries. She used to look good back in the day, but not so much anymore. Just want to say, not so good. She's not aged well. Anyway, so she tips off the police as to the brothers' involvement. Now, let's take a step back here for just a second. This whole psychologist thing and the issue of, what you say to a psychologist and it being something that there's term for it. Why am I struggling with it right now? Probably because I'm drinking. Confidentiality. There's patient-doctor confidentiality in these cases. I feel like this is one of those major cases that people think of, or this really is what brought that idea of confidentiality into the forefront of, people's minds, because this is one of those things where they had to really tread carefully just to make sure that none of this evidence got thrown out from the psychologist, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, I know that psychiatrists and psychologists they have to report a crime. They're not allowed to.
I don't know if they have. Is it that they have to report a crime, or they have to report if someone's in imminent danger? You know what I mean? Like if somebody says they committed a crime, I don't know if they have to report that. But if they say they're going to kill someone, they do have to report that. Does that make sense?
Right, but I think in this particular case, they confessed that they killed an actual crime that occurred. Right? So they confessed to a particular crime that already occurred that they knew about. So I think that was what the impetus was.
Well, and they opened Pandora's box by the mistress hearing it, and also by threatening the doctor, which is a fucking mistake on their part. So Lyle was actually arrested near the mansion on March 8, 1990, after police received that information that he was preparing to flee California, just like Johnny said. And Eric, who was in Israel, as Blake said, surrendered himself 3 days later upon returning to L.A., which, again, my ass wouldn't have come back. I would have been like fucking Roman Polanski. You ain't catching me. I'm out. I'm just saying. Not a chance, especially for
look for some place that doesn't have extradition, I think, is what they were looking for, right?
Yeah. I'd be going somewhere. I don't know. But I'll tell you this, especially I wouldn't be coming back to a state that has the death penalty. Now, granted, California never fucking uses it, but they did have the death penalty at that time. So, it's a bad way to be, is what I'm thinking. But both were remanded without bail, and they were kept separate from each other. And that's kind of the theme here. The way this turns out is they actually are kept separate from each other, which is a strange thing, but it's almost like a double punishment. Okay, well, 5 months later, August 1990, you've got Judge James Albrecht, who, by the way, is another major player in this case because I feel like he holds a lot of the brothers' destiny in his hands, and as to how these things go. But he rules that the tapes of conversations between Eric and his psychologist were admissible because Lau had voided doctor-patient privilege by threatening physical harm against Oziel, which, that's what I thought. That ruling was appealed, delaying the proceedings for 2 years. That's a long fucking time. So they got to sit in jail for 2 years? Is that how I understand this? That's fucked up.
Much.
You have a right to a speedy trial. I'd be pissed. Although if you're just going to go to jail anyway, I guess what's the difference? You know what I mean? So after the ruling was initially overturned on appeal, the Supreme Court of California declared in August 1992 that several tapes were admissible, but not the tape of Eric discussing the murders. So they kind of handcuffed the prosecution there a little bit. But after that decision, a Los Angeles County grand jury issued indictments in December 1992. So this shit's been going on since '89 now, charging the brothers with the murder of their parents. So let's move forward with the trials. And yes, it is more than one trial.
Which was broadcast on Court TV. And that was like a big thing that brought Court TV to the forefront, because then Court TV did the OJ trial too. They were like this little.
That's I think what makes this case so famous is this and OJ being so publicized. You know, it wasn't the type of thing. I mean, look, we know Dahmer, we know Bundy, we know Gacy, we know all that shit. And as a whole, we get news reports about what they did, and there's some like iconic imagery of the bodies being removed from Gacy's, you know, cross face and shit like that. But like, there wasn't this type of coverage for these types of crimes, you know?
Well, yeah,
It's
also
a totally different thing.
Both of them were kind of photogenic, right? And same thing when OJ. So they were both photogenic. They were perfect for the fodder of primetime TV and primetime television. So.
Yeah, exactly. And so, you know, Court TV broadcast the trial, 1993. The younger brother, Lyle's defense attorney, Leslie Abramson, she is another star of this whole case. You know, she became famous for her flamboyant defense. You know, she claims that the brothers were driven to murder by a lifetime of abuse at the hands of her parents, including sexual abuse at the hands of their father, who is described as a cruel, callous, perfectionist, and pedophile. Now, the time is a good time as any to talk about this. Let's not get into whether it's okay to kill your parents if someone does this. Let's not even get into that yet. Here's the question that I have for you two. Do you believe any of the testimony? And now I do believe for sure that Jose was at least abusive, but do you guys believe that he molested his children in any way, shape, or form?
Based off of what I learned about this, it didn't seem like that there was credible evidence for it. But simply because it was so premeditated and it didn't, and to have two people doing it, it just didn't seem credible for me.
Yeah. How about you, Blake?
Well, I don't know. Obviously, I didn't know Jose personally, and I didn't, obviously know a lot about anything to do with the kids before the murders. But I did see that it looked like he was maybe, a little rough around the edges with them. But I didn't see any evidence presented to me that he or Kitty or the both of them had anything to do with them sexually. Now, as far as the abuse, I was a little bit of a rare case. My mother was well aware of the abuse that I suffered and did nothing because she believed that if I continued to try my best to love my stepfather, that one day he would see the error in his ways and he would understand what love really was, and that would make him stop the aggressive, terrifying behavior he exhibited, which obviously was bullshit because he never stopped. So there are the cases where both parents are party to abuse, but it's very rare that I hear about it as far as sexual abuse. That's rare, and I didn't see any indication that went on. From what I understand, I didn't see any indication that there was anything like that showing where I would want to just make the assumption that there was sexual abuse. I mean, I do think that Dad was a little hard on them, but they were also small brats. They had life energy on a silver platter, and they blew their money.
Not to convolute it with the battered woman syndrome, but that was also around that time frame, right? Around 92, 91. There was a number of cases that were coming from the battered woman syndrome, where the battered woman would kill the husband that was beating them. So it's completely plausible that that's what they were building off of as well. I mean, there was a case, 92, 91 or something like that went over about a woman that was battered, and it was a big publicized case. And it's possible that the kids just used that as another example, like to manipulate the law to their advantage. They appeared to be more interested in the money than anything else. Once the parents were dead, they went hog wild, spending all their the fortune. So you would think if they were, I don't know how anybody would react if you were sexually abused for that long and they killed your father. Would you go out on the shopping spree at that point? I don't know, but obviously the jury.
That's a good point. I mean, and to piggyback off what Johnny said, there were a lot of cases in the time with the battered woman syndrome, and I think that by posing the point that there could have been abuse from both parents, including the mother, that painted up the picture to be so cruel and unusual that it might have drawn sympathy for the boys, because it's bad enough when your dad is the one causing the problem, but when your mother is privy to that and does nothing about it, that makes it seem more outright and shameful and just awful. And I think that's what they used to exploit. It's like, well, both parents, had this outward appearance of all this money and loving family, but really they were both, psychotic and doing criminal things to their children and this, that, and the other. And it painted a picture for the jury of these two boys being, victims of their own parents. And I think that made it just more outright upsetting, but it didn't have any bearing on, obviously, any long-lasting opinion of the parents, because as we know, as we'll get into, I mean, they didn't buy it, really. So.
I'm glad we went down this rabbit hole, because there's some things about this whole thing that are really interesting to me. I'm willing to believe that they were molested. I'm willing to believe it, but that doesn't mean that I just outwardly believe it. I just think it's possible, and that's based on several things. Okay, first thing that I want to base that on is that one of the boys, the same fucking cousin, obviously. One of them they have a cousin who testified that, like, I can't remember if it was Lyle or Eric, had asked him if his dad gave him massages, and he was like, yeah, I mean, not really. He's like, where does he give you massages? And he's like, on my penis. And he's asking him if that was normal. And so, this is coming from a cousin. Now, obviously, somebody can fabricate that and try to defend their cousin because it's their cousin. And then, and the other question, or the other thing was, and again, this could be written off, because if you listen to the fucking police calls, some of the other things, you could just say the Menendez brothers are good actors. But if you watch their testimony, when they start talking about this abuse, they were convincing. I mean, regardless of what you think about them, what they did, all that shit, the 911 calls aside, their testimony when they were talking about the abuse, like, it was believable, And again, I don't want to totally base it on that, because they've already proved to be fucking con artists on some level. But yeah, man, when you hear that testimony, you kind of feel for them. But at the same time, I'm like, well, what did Kitty do? I mean, whatever she did, she didn't deserve to be shot in the fucking face, if it were true. So, I don't know, man. It's an interesting thing. I mean, regardless, they kind of deserve what they get in the end, because I don't think it's a viable excuse for what they did, especially for it to be so premeditated. But we'll get into that here in a minute. So anyway, Kitty was portrayed as selfish, mentally unstable, alcoholic, and a drug addict who had enabled her husband's abuses and was also sometimes violent towards them. I'm sure some of that's true. I mean, but that's some parents for you. It doesn't mean you get to fucking kill them. The first trial ended with 2 deadlocked juries, and the voting jurors went along sex lines as men on both juries voted for a conviction. So basically, women were voting, that they had a reason for what they did, and men were like, fuck them. And to be honest with you, that really doesn't surprise me. Does that surprise you too? I mean, because I feel like women are more, I don't know, empathetic creatures that are looking for the good people, and us men, we're like, fuck them. I mean, look what they did. Look at these pictures.
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess it would go along the same lines as, both of them were married in prison.
Yeah.
Primarily because they were, there was some sort of attraction to that, or adoration to the kids, and I call them kids. Right. So I guess it's a matter of empathy, maybe that the women empathize a little bit with that